6 years ago, Marvel announced Fantastic Four, and with endless delays, controversial productions and casting, and a poorly calibrated future plan for the MCU, this movie was said to be the turning point for the universe. Kevin Feige has recently been super transparent about the production struggles through phases 4 and 5 of the MCU, and though I like most projects more than others, the 2020s has felt very off for the MCU thus far. For me, this all took a drastic shift with Daredevil Born Again. It felt like the MCU had finally hit a stride. Born Again somehow recaptures one of my favorite shows of all time, and then we got Thunderbolts, a more personal story about self-doubt and family, introducing more mystical elements with The Void, doing just enough to get me even more excited for a film that was already in my top 5 most anticipated films of 2025. Now comes Fantastic Four, set outside of the main MCU universe with ties to the big bad of the future of the MCU, Doctor Doom. Does this save the MCU? Is it the best of the recent MCU movies? And does it deliver on one of the most important comic book films in Marvel's history? As always, I want to talk about the good, the mixed, and the bad, and give you my final score at the end. I would love to hear what you thought of Fantastic Four in the comments down below. I'll be doing an MCU ranked as well as a spoiler review of the film later this weekend, so subscribe so you don't miss that. But let's talk Fantastic Four. Starting it off with the good, to me, one of the most intriguing parts of the Fantastic Four lore is the Silver Surfer. This time we get Shallya Ball's version of this character, the female Silver Surfer, and she surfs on lava, which is the coolest thing ever. The early 2000s Silver Surfer just feels like aura farming, and it works there, but I really feel like for being the loneliest character in the entire universe, we've never really gotten a very interesting and intriguing adaptation of this character until now. They do a little bit of backstory work, and I think it adds to the character, but overall, I just think the way that they play through the story of Galactus makes Silver Surfer that much more interesting, to an extent that makes Galactus just a little bit less interesting, but that's a trade-off I'm really willing to take, especially when a lot of this story is just based in the ethics of a god coming to conquer Earths that were chosen by the Silver Surfer, this character that feels so much guilt yet is so lonely, hasn't seen her family in millions and billions of years since Galactus has chosen her. The two other characters that I think they do a phenomenal job at capturing in this film is Reed Richards and Sue Storm. With Reed, they take an angle that I feel like most media hasn't really taken thus far, and it's the I'm so smart that I'm tormented by the ideas that other citizens of the world can't even fathom. And that comes into play a lot when you have this outer worldly Galactus threat. And I just think it's the perfect way to better understand this character in a more unique way than we've ever gotten before. And on the flip side of that, I think Sue is truly the main character with her motherly storyline, introducing Franklin Richards into the play here. I just think there's so much going on with both of these characters that the dynamic between them, with the stress of having Franklin, but also trying to save the world, I think Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby are phenomenal across from each other. My absolute favorite part of this entire film, though, is this space sequence that I don't want to give too much away about, but it is very reminiscent of Interstellar. It involves a black hole, it involves slingshots, it's an intergalactic chase. It's really the first time that we feel the scale, the threat, and really the demolition that Galactus can cause, and really brings stakes, personal stakes, to the Fantastic Four team. This about 10-minute scene is, to me, where I really felt a familial threat, an existential idea, similar to kind of Tiamat in Eternals, where you have these very existential gods and things that affect everyday people that you just can't really put into scale until you have our heroes in front of them. This Interstellar-esque intergalactic chase felt like the Achilles heel of this film, in that it was exactly what I've always wanted from the Fantastic Four. You have Silver Surfer chasing the entire family, slingshotting around a black hole. It's genuinely the coolest thing you can think of when you think of a sci-fi space comic book movie. And then you realize that we're never going to get to these heights again, so they kind of just gave me more of what I'm never going to get again. Now, in terms of our big bad of Galactus in this film, and kind of how they defeat him, but more so just building out this world, this feels so much more science-y than the rest of the MCU. I mean, we always had Bruce Banner and Tony Stark building new things, but this truly feels like interdimensional space science, and that's really what I love. Galactus individually, I think the visual effects are great. The threat is great. Ralph Ineson's voice as Galactus is amazing. I just think Galactus doesn't work as well as he could have, but I think it's just because Silver Surfer takes so much of that villainous shine. Visually, I also think this movie is so exciting and interesting and truly a masterclass in terms of comic book films. The production design, the costumes, the practicality, I think all of that, and also lined with the score and the VFX, which are 99.9% really great. Everything on a visual and technical level just comes together to create a brand new world. And I think for this film, and probably the first half of it, I'd say, the world was so important to all of these characters. And at a certain point, our characters get so isolated in this mission to defeat Galactus that I'll get into more later, I didn't really like as much. I think for the part that the world relies on these characters for, it's all executed really, really well. Getting into the mixed, I want to start by talking about Johnny Storm. I will say the performance from him is absolutely amazing. That is classified in the good category. But most of the characterization itself for Johnny Storm feels so lackluster, and this also ties into the pacing, in my opinion, because so much of this film is so isolated with all these Fantastic Four characters trying to defeat this outer-worldly threat. Johnny Storm is such a character based in the social idea of what the Fantastic Four are. And they built us into this world where we're 4 years into this team. I feel like they could have done a lot on like the promotional end of what Johnny Storm's capable of, like they did in the early 2000s films, and they just never really get there. All this to say, I am going to rewatch this movie before doing my full spoiler review this weekend, so look out for that, as on a second watch, I think with slightly tempered expectations, I'll like it a little bit more than I did. Hand in hand with the Johnny Storm stuff comes the world building. I think the second to third act kind of idea slash plot point that they try to push forward, kind of how they're solving all of this Galactus mumbo jumbo, it feels like the plot is just paper thin. It feels like they are really scraping by with how they're going to defeat Galactus, and none of it really feels earned by the final minutes of the film. We've had these characters in this world for 4 years, yet it doesn't really feel like that because of the inconsistent pacing. It is kind of paced like a TV show, and I've heard a lot of people say that. It makes sense. Matt Shakman is a TV show director, and I think this movie is just so focused on speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down, that it just makes all of the stakes feel so inconsistent with the film. That leads me to the action of this film, which though is far and few between, I think some of the more exhilarating overall action sequences work, like the Interstellar-esque scene in my opinion. But the final battle, for example, just feels so basic Fantastic Four. And I know a lot of people are always like, and we'll get to the origin stuff in a second here, we've seen an origin a million times, we don't need to see it again. This time they don't go through with the origin, but they basically just replay out scenes that we've seen in earlier Fantastic Four films in terms of how they use their powers. Reed isn't using his stretching powers in any unique way. Sue is doing the exact same stuff that she did in the first two Fantastic Four films. Johnny is doing the same exact things. The Thing doesn't really do anything in this movie, and we'll get to that later. The family is amazing in these sit-down personal moments where the chemistry really does shine. But in the action, it doesn't feel like a Fantastic Four team. Maybe I'm being overly critical because I think the chemistry in the original films works really well, but I don't think this is horrible. I just think they didn't really use the Fantastic Four to their highest of their abilities in terms of the action itself. But this is in the mix section just because I think the chemistry outside of the action is just absolutely amazing. Finally, though, to talk about the bad of Fantastic Four First Steps, I think the dread that Galactus brings to this film, the world-ending threat, though it does feel real, it is very inconsistent. I think Silver Surfer really excels in making this film feel scary to an extent, but I also do think that the idea of it being set on a separate Earth didn't work to its advantage, at least in the way that I envisioned. I am very much dancing around spoilers here, and I am going to mention things that are in the marketing, so if you haven't seen any of the trailers, click off the video now. But Galactus is a world destroyer. We know this, but I do not give a flying f about anyone who lives on the planet except for our Fantastic Four characters. And as per the marketing material, they have a ship that can do interdimensional travel, so why the f wouldn't they just leave? And yes, it is an idea that is slightly brought up in this movie of, we can get off this planet and save our kid. I'm not saying that they should have done that, and I'm not saying that Reed actually means that when he says it, because again, a big part of Reed's thematic arc in this film is having to go through the traumatic decisions and make decisions that normal citizens wouldn't even fathom having to make. But the fact that they brought that up, and this also isn't our main MCU world, so I don't give a f. Spider-Man doesn't live here. Miss Marvel doesn't live here. Hawkeye doesn't live here. None of the characters that we know and love are actually affected by anything going on. So if it is an option for them to just poof, fly off, why wouldn't they? A big part of this is the fact that it's an origin-less superhero movie. We don't know what the world was like before their DNA got cosmically altered. We don't care about the evolution of this world because we never got to experience the rise of it. We never got to actually understand how much this world means to these characters. Obviously, it means a great deal because they are protecting it. And if they had made us care for this Earth, that's a completely different thing. I absolutely love the fact that this film doesn't require any homework, that it's set on its own world in the sense that it is able to tell a unique Elseworlds-esque story in the MCU, but when you don't build your stakes properly, then I don't care. I would venture to say this is the first time an origin-less superhero movie has completely failed for me in the sense of really making me care about these characters, and The Thing, aka Ben Grimm, is the perfect example of this. Maybe I'm so hostile towards the character work in terms of the origin stories towards this film just because of how dirty they did The Thing. The Thing feels like he is barely a part of this movie, not only on an action level, but also just character-wise. He is, for the most part, used as comedic relief. And that sucks to see as a character that arguably has the most depth out of the entire cast. The Thing's entire story revolves around the cosmically altered DNA. And none of that is touched upon in this film, which is so frustrating when you're really taking away the depth out of one of the four characters on your team. I genuinely think Sue Storm and Reed Richards are done really well. But then you also shoehorn in Franklin Richards, which it's interesting to me how they decided to throw in Franklin Richards into this story so quickly. And again, I think they did it because of the Kang and Doctor Doom and Secret Wars and Doomsday pivot. I understand this wasn't necessarily their choice. They had to do it somehow. But Franklin Richards just feels so out of place here. We already have little to no depth and connection and understanding of our characters, and you're somehow just gonna throw in a baby that we're supposed to care about. And again, I know he is an absolutely essential character in the future of the MCU, but writing-wise, it just feels very lazy. At the end of the day, I really had a fun time with Fantastic Four First Steps, but it lacks any and all depth I expected from this team, and really what I wanted on a thematic and existential level with characters like Galactus and Silver Surfer. I think emotionally the performances all work, but again, it just lacks any depth in all the in-between moments. Overall, I'm going to give Fantastic Four First Steps a 7 out of 10. Again, I do think my rating will go up upon a second watch, which I will be talking about in my spoiler review later this weekend, so subscribe so you don't miss that. But that wraps up all my thoughts on Fantastic Four First Steps. As always, let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.